as we go? Yeah, okay.
Wonderful. Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Ashley Pinsent-Tobin. I work at NSCC International, and I am the person that gets to work with lovely people like Caroline and Mike. So I'm what's known as a RISIA, and Caroline will explain this shortly. So I'm a registered international student immigration advisor, and Caroline is a step up. She is the registered Canadian immigration consultant who works with us here at NSCC. And so we're really glad to have Caroline's expertise, and she's going to present for us today. And along with Caroline is our favorite Ivany International Supports. It's Mike Duggan. And Mike has a great piece that he's going to talk through all of you on what to do when you finish your classes and before you apply for your postgraduate work permit. So I'm going to monitor the chat and answer whatever questions I can while we go. And I'm going to turn it over to Mike and Caroline to do the actual presenting. And Mike is going to start us off with our land acknowledgement. So thanks for being here, everybody. And we'll share this recording and the slides after.
So whenever we are on campus or in our virtual environments, we just want to make sure that we recognize that we are on Mi'kma'ki, the unceded ancestral land of the Mi'kmaq people. And when we come together, especially with our amazing international students, we just want to make sure that we have these meetings with the foundation of respect and gratitude for being here on this land. So just wanted to say that very, very quickly and heartfelt to do our land acknowledgement. And thanks a lot for everybody joining us. And with that, I will mute myself, probably turn off my camera and turn things over to Caroline.
Okay, hi everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining. I'm Caroline. As Ashley mentioned, I am an RCIC, a registered Canadian immigration consultant, and I work with NSCC and all the wonderful people there to help with immigration-related advice that students might have. So just a little bit of background about your supports, I guess, at NSCC. So as Ashley mentioned, she is the RISIA. Everything is an acronym. So she's the RISIA, R-I-S-I-A, and what their role is within institutions is to provide information on things that are related to studies. So study permits, co-op work permits, postgraduate work permits, and also some advice about your family while you're studying. Also, NSCC hosts regular information sessions, so members of representatives from IRCC, the Nova Scotia Office of Immigration and Population Growth also can provide, I think they provide a couple of presentations throughout the year. One restriction for RISIA is that they can't answer questions on permanent residency. That is something that you have to be an RCIC to do, so that's part of my role working with NSCC. So generally, if you have an immigration question, if you're thinking about life beyond NSCC and you have some questions about your immigration options, then that's where I can come in to help. So your first point of contact is always going to be within the institution. So it's depending on what campus you're at, you're either going to go to Mike, Jenny, or Farhana, and then they will answer with all of the knowledge that they have. And if they need to seek further advice, then they'll contact me. Also a reminder that there's a lot of great information that we have on the website that we all work together to provide, so that you're not necessarily having to go to somebody or wait for a response. You can actually seek out some information for yourself. And that's the link there. So starting out today, we're going to talk about the postgraduate work permit. You may already have a good idea of what this is all about. The way the presentation will go is we're just going to go do a quick refresher of what the permit is, a few details about it, looking at what's required for eligibility, looking at the application process, looking at if you have a spouse or dependents, what the process will be for them. And then any questions? I think Mike will also hop in a little bit about processes at the end of the term that will lead you to getting some of the documents that you need for this application. So I'll go through the slides, I'll go through the information, and then we'll be sure to save a lot of time at the end for questions. And as Ashley mentioned, she is going to be monitoring the chat. So if you do have a question you want to be sure that gets addressed, you can just type it in there and she'll either answer it immediately or we can save it for the end. Sound good? Okay. So what is the permit? It is an open work permit. It's a permit that is specifically designed for graduates of institutions in Canada, which are designated learning institutions. And it is intended to give you the opportunity to gain Canadian work experience after you graduate. An important thing to note about this permit is that it is a once in a lifetime permit. You only can apply for and receive this permit once in your lifetime. So the reason that this is important to know is that if you are ever considering maybe doing another program of study, you may want to take that factor in to think about when it is that you actually want to apply and receive this work permit. The length of the work permit is based on the length of your program. It's not based on how long it takes you to complete the program. It's based on the length of the program itself. So part of that application is a letter from your institution that states to IRCC, we consider this program to be this amount of time. And that's what IRCC uses to assess the length of your permit. So if you are enrolled in a one-year program, and it's considered a one-year program by your institution, then you're eligible for a one-year work permit once you graduate. If you are in a two-year program or a 2+ year program, then you are eligible for a 3-year work permit once you graduate. And if you do two programs within 2 years of each other, so if you do, for example, a year-long program and then you return back to do a second year-long program, those can be looked at as combined, and that also increases the eligibility to a 3-year postgraduate work permit. So to be eligible to apply for the work permit upon graduation, you have to have successfully completed the program of study. You have to have maintained full-time status, except for your final semester of study. You are allowed to be part-time in your final semester, but the eligibility requirement is that you maintain full-time status throughout your program of study. You must have had a valid study permit throughout your studies, and also part of the application, you need to have your transcript and your letter of completion from NSCC that confirms that you've met all the requirements to complete your program of study. So for anybody who has done a co-op work permit application, it's kind of a step up from that. It's not quite as involved as the study permit application. There's no letters of explanation necessarily that are needed, or study plans or work plans. You really just need to gather the documents. When do you want to apply for this? So with the postgraduate work permit, you have 180 days following the day that you complete your program to submit your application. However, there's a couple of things to think about there. So for one, the criteria is that you either have or have had a valid study permit. And we'll get into that a little bit about how it affects your ability to work. One thing to remember is that once you complete your program of study, so once you are no longer studying, IRCC actually considers your study permit invalid 3 months later. So even if your study permit is valid for a year past your program completion date, if you're no longer studying, then IRCC will sort of cut that validity off after 90 days. So you still can apply for your postgraduate work permit after that 90 days, but you may not be eligible to work. So you do want to think about that sort of timing. Most students apply for it as soon as possible for a variety of reasons, and that's totally fine as well. But you do have that period of 180 days after applying to apply. So you can apply as soon as you receive the letter of completion from NSCC. A little note here about working. So and Mike, you might want to jump in here because you know a little bit more about the timelines. But there may be a period of time between when you finish your classes and when you receive that letter of completion from your school. So you can, if you finished your courses, there are no classes available for you to take anymore, but you're still enrolled, you haven't received that letter of completion, you are authorized to keep working what used to be called part-time on your study permit. And if you are eligible for the temporary exemption that IRCC has around working hours on your study permit, then you can actually work full-time. If that's a little bit confusing, just check in with us a little bit later. We can confirm what that means. Essentially, right now, as you probably know, the restriction of 20 hours per week has been lifted by IRCC. You are, as an international student, if you're enrolled full-time, you are allowed to work full-time. So that period between your courses being over and getting your letter of completion, you can work full-time during that period if you qualify for that exemption. If your study permit is valid on the day that you submit your postgraduate work permit application online, then you can begin or continue working full-time as soon as you've submitted that. And so that's why a lot of students get the application together so that if they have a job offer, if you get that application, if you get everything ready to go, you get that letter of completion on that day, you upload everything, click submit, then you can continue to work full-time while you're waiting for your postgraduate work permit to be processed. You don't have to wait for an approval. If your study permit is not valid on the day that you submit your application, then you aren't eligible to work. So you have to wait until the permit is approved before you start working. Also, if it's not valid, you want to be sure that you still are maintaining legal status in Canada. So if your study permit is going to expire, then you want to think about switching to visitor status so that you can stay in Canada while you're waiting. Of course, you can also travel if you want to. If you want to apply outside of Canada, that's also an option for you. Again, specific questions to your situation, bring them to your international student advisor, and we'll provide a more individual response. So far, so good? Okay. So how do you apply? So we do have a guide that is they're updated every year so that the information is current, and the link is there. They also exist in the International Student Guidebook in the website. So as mentioned, you can begin at any point collecting all the documents that you need to apply. So you do need to have a copy of your transcript. It doesn't need to be an official copy of your transcript. It can be an unofficial version. That's fine, as long as all of the grades for all of your courses are there. You also need that letter of completion. You need a copy of your passport, a digital photo, and the IMM 5710 application form. All of this information, how to fill in the form, how to answer the questionnaire, all of that is located in the guide that's linked there. Great idea to take a look at that guide before you start so that you have a good idea of what the process is, what's involved, and start preparing. And there is a fee of $255 for the work permit.
Is now an okay for me to do my NSCC thing?
Jump in, go for it.
So, before everyone emails Jennifer, Hannah, and I about when am I going to get my letter of completion, how do I get my transcripts, I need these to apply for my postgraduate work permit. This is how the process will go for the majority of international students who are completing their program this spring. The majority of you will be completing your spring semester, which is probably going to be a final work placement. Okay, so you will be done probably your work placement end of May. And then what happens is the faculty who is in charge of your work placement and overseeing your work placement will give you a P for pass for your work placement. Then the registrar at your campus has to go in to every single student's account, review all of their courses, make sure they have passed of everything, and then the registrar at your campus will close off each individual student. When the registrar closes off you, that is going to automatically trigger the letter of completion to be sent to your personal email that is on file. So it's very important that we have your current personal email that you're using, and your letter of completion will be emailed to you that night to your personal email on file. So what will happen is the day before, the registrar at your campus will review everything. They will close you off. That night, you will probably get your letter of completion. You will wake up, you will see that you have your letter of completion. Great. That's the first thing that you need from NSCC to apply for the postgraduate work permit. The other thing is the transcripts. So when you see that you have received your letter of completion, then it is very simple. You just log into My NSCC, you find your transcripts, which now at this point are going to be your unofficial final transcripts. And if you read it carefully, you'll see the P for pass on your final work placement or whatever spring course you had. And you'll also see like credential earned, diploma in blah, 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 certificate in blah, blah, blah. So you'll be able to tell that it is a final unofficial transcript, and you download that off of My NSCC. Great. Now you've got the 2 documents you need from NSCC to apply for your postgraduate work permit. So that is how the process works at the end of your program, at the end of your work placement, mostly your final work placement. Faculty gives you a grade, the registrar at the campus closes you off, you get your letter of completion, you then go get your final transcripts, and then you can apply for the postgraduate work permit. Okay, so those are the pieces that I just was gonna jump in and share.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Okay, so after all of those processes and you have submitted your application, so as mentioned earlier, you can work full-time while you're waiting for your application, your permit to be approved, as long as you meet those 3 criteria. Your study permit was valid on the day that you submitted your application, you were enrolled full-time in your program, and you did not work over the authorized number of hours. And also that your study permit authorizes you to work off campus. So if all of those things are true, then you can submit your application and you can carry on working in whichever job. So a postgraduate work permit, it's an open work permit. That means you can work for any job, part-time, full-time, any employer, anywhere in Canada. Important to note, though, that once you receive that letter of completion, you're no longer enrolled. You're no longer considered enrolled as a student. So unless you submit your postgraduate work permit application, you're not authorized to work. So if you get your letter of completion, if you have a job and you get your letter of completion on a Monday and you don't submit your application for your postgraduate work permit until a Friday, you're actually not technically authorized to work those days in between. So just, again, be ready to, if you do have a job and you want to continue working seamlessly without a break, then just be sure that you've got everything in place to get that application submitted. And of course, if it happens that you receive a refusal on your application, if it's not approved, then you need to stop working immediately, and you need to consider what your options are. You will be asked to leave Canada because that your status is no longer valid. So you, at that point, you would have to apply to restore your status as a visitor, depending on your situation. Of course, it's going to be a individual basis. Touch wood, we don't hear from many students who have had a refusal on their application. It is a pretty straightforward application, so as long as you have the right documents, you should be fine. And very often, sometimes we not very often, it happens that sometimes if something is missing, that you may be contacted for more information. So it is a pretty fair process, so we don't want to strike fear into anybody, but we want you to be aware of all of the situations around the postgraduate work permit. Okay, so work permit and your spouse. Postgraduate work permit and your spouse. So bear with me. This is a relatively new change, and this is the fun part of immigration: is that there are rules, and then there's a change, and we have to figure out exactly what that means. So I'll do my best to explain what's happening now. If you do have more specific questions, then we're happy to handle them. But this is sort of where we are now. So the rules around when and who and what criteria you need for your spouse to apply for an open work permit if you have a postgraduate work permit have changed. So I'm actually a slide ahead of myself, so I'll start out with the basics. If your spouse currently has an open work permit because of you having a study permit, that open work, the work permit that your spouse currently has its own validity date, its own expiry date, and that work permit stays valid regardless of whether you submit your application for your postgraduate work permit. So that you stopping studying does not mean that that work permit becomes invalid. It stays valid until the date that it expires. You can apply online for an open work permit under your new status as a postgraduate work permit holder. So let's take a look at what that is. So as of January 2023, you no longer need to be working in a high-skilled position for your spouse to be eligible to apply for an open work permit under your postgraduate work permit. The criteria is if you as the postgraduate work permit holder have a job that is valid for 6 months past the date of the open work permit application. So if your spouse is submitting an application, you want to ensure that your job is valid for 6 months past that date that they apply. You need a letter of employment from your employer indicating that you are employed and having some of the job duties listed. And that you will be employed until a decision is made on the open work permit application. So I know it's a little bit confusing. So essentially, if you're submitting your spouse's open work permit application, you need to have a job. The job itself needs to be valid for 6 months past the date upon which you're applying, and you have to stay in that job until a decision is made on that open work permit application. You also have to be physically present in Canada while working. So for the spouse open work permit application, you need to present a copy of your postgraduate work permit, a letter of employment from your employer confirming what the tier level is for your job, that's the skill level, and outlining what the relevant duties are for that job. You also need to present evidence that your relationship is valid. So that might be a marriage certificate, it might be a common law statute declaration. This new policy also applies to what they refer to as working age children. What that age is, I'm not totally sure. Mike and Ashley might have some input. I'm going to say, for the sake of clarity, that we're probably looking at 18 and above, because would a 16-year-old, somebody who's still in school, be working full-time? Probably not. But anyway, that if you are applying for a dependent, then you would have to provide proof of what that relationship is. So birth certificate, adoption certificate, whatever is necessary there.
Caroline, can I ask you a quick question before you, or just add to what you just said?
Yeah, for sure.
So that piece about what you just said about dependent or working age children. So my understanding was that dependent could be 23 and under.
Right.
And so that seems confusing, doesn't it?
It's very confusing. And again, this is sort of based on my current understanding. And if you do have, if anybody has a question about their specific situation, send us an email and we can look into it further. From the policy that I read, it simply indicates working age children, which isn't defined. What is that? Right? I mean,
I'll see what I can find.
Because we have the age of minority, which is 19, but you can work. That's not necessarily the working age. So I think to be safe, we would be looking at, 18 to 22-year-olds.
Yeah.
would
Okay.
be, they'd still fit in that dependent category, but they're also able to work full time. They're not in school anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Gray-
I'll see
gray
if I can
area
find
for sure.
anything, but I agree with you.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
There's
And I
some
know this
questions
is
that are coming
being-
in, but we're going to
I'm
hold
sure,
them.
I'm sure. And I know this is being recorded, and I do apologize for not having that specific point of information. But I think generally too, the more questions that we get from students, they tend to be more around the spouse as opposed to dependent children. So let's save questions about that until the end. I'm sure there's many. And just a note about traveling. So you can travel after you submit your postgraduate work permit application. Totally fine. You don't have to remain in Canada after you've applied. If you do have plans to travel after you graduate, we generally recommend that you apply before you leave. The important thing is to be able to come back into the country. So you want to be sure that if you're planning to travel, you do have a valid TRV or ETA to get back in. When you return, you are, of course, are going to go through customs, and you can indicate that you have submitted your application for your postgraduate work permit. We would recommend, have that proof ready on your phone or however else you want to present it to border officials. Also remember that depending on the length of time of processing and how long you are planning to be out of the country, if the postgraduate work permit is approved, it needs to be mailed somewhere, and it will be mailed to the address that you provide in your application. So if you do have plans to travel, it is okay to use, a trusted friend or family member for that mailing address. But be sure that if that's the situation, if you're going to be gone for a long time, you feel that the permit might be mailed before you return, be sure that whatever address you provided, somebody's still going to be there to get it. When you return, when you come back into Canada, if your work permit application has been approved, you'll be admitted as a worker. If it hasn't yet been approved, then a couple of things might happen. Even if your study permit is still valid, it's up to the border official about how they're going to admit you. If you're no longer studying, then are you still a student? So they may admit you instead as a visitor, which is fine. It means you still have valid status in Canada. You still can continue to work with that visitor status as long as you met the criteria to be able to work, meaning that your study permit was valid on the day that you applied and you were authorized on it to work off campus. Okay, so that's the information in the slides. Now let's look at some of the questions that you have.
We have a lot. Some I am in the process of answering.
Okay.
And so let's go back up to the top because there was a couple I'm like, oh, let's wait for Caroline to do this,
Okay.
please.
Okay.
So I first want to go back to Ryan Buckley. He had asked the question about does the PGWP holder need to have a skilled job? Is that at the point of application? And two, can the PGWP and spousal open work permit be applied for at the same time? And quite a few people have that same question.
So with the new policy, no, you don't need to have a skilled job. You need to have a job offer, but it does not need to be at a certain skill level. And yes, you can apply. Let me think about that one. So can the PGWP and the spousal be applied for at the same time? If you have a job offer and you're meeting that criteria, then
I would say
I
have the same pause every year.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
if you already have, like, let's say your part-time work and school job meets that classification and your employer is going to take you on full-time,
Yeah.
then you will already have your pay stub, your 3 pay stubs, and your job offer and all of that. So you can apply for both at the same time. So your postgraduate work permit and your spouse's open work permit.
Yeah.
But when you apply, if you apply for your postgraduate work permit and you don't have your job yet, you cannot apply for your spouse.
Yes.
You have to wait until you get your postgraduate work permit in hand. and then include that with their application.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I'm just thinking about the new policy with just having a job. Yeah, I'm going to absolutely agree with Ashley that if you know that you're meeting the criteria, if you have a job offer, it's extending past for 6 months past the date that you're applying, you have a letter from your employer, then you can go ahead and submit both at the same time. If not, then apply first for your postgraduate work permit and then for the open work permit. If you apply for both and the open work permit is refused, you can apply again for that. But again, you are paying for that. You're not going to get that processing fee back. So you want to be sure that you're meeting that criteria before you submit both applications.
Yep. And that includes your kids as well. If you have already a job offer and meeting the required requirements to apply for the extension for both your spouse and your kids, right?
So what permit would you be applying for your kids? Would that be a work permit as well?
Study permits.
Okay, so the study permit is separate. If your kids have their own study permits, then those permits are their own, and they, similar to a work permit having its own validity, those study permits also have their own expiry. So if they're going to expire soon, then yeah, you can do all of the applications at once through the portal.
Right.
But if your kids' study permits are valid for another 6 or 8 months, then you don't have to do that right away. You can change your status and their study permits still remain valid.
Right. So for me, all the permits would be expiring in August of this year.
Okay.
And then I already have my job offer and meeting all the requirements. So I'm thinking just to do one application instead of separating them, seeing that I don't know when I'll get that response from IRCC to have the physical work permit in order to extend my spouse and kids.
Sure. So what you can do is when you go to apply for the postgraduate work permit, you're essentially using your GC key as a portal to present those applications. So one of the questions in there is, do you also want to apply for a family member? So you can answer yes to that, and then that will be, you can add the study permit applications.
Right.
But those study permit applications don't hinge on you having, getting that postgraduate work permit. They're their own separate applications.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, that'll take care of a lot of questions that we have. Leandro asked a question about, can we extend the postgraduate work permit? And there was an announcement that came out at the end of last week that announced that postgraduate work permit holders could extend.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get more details on April the 6th.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it impacts all of you because you haven't applied for postgraduate work permits yet.
Mm-hmm.
So come back to us on that one, or, just stay tuned and we'll let you know more information when we have it. Generally, though, students will tend to apply for permanent residency if they've had their postgraduate work permit for a year or two. That's what most people work towards. But there is a possibility that your PGWP can be extended. Mm-hmm. So stay tuned for more information.
Yeah, it's difficult to say because the policy that of being able to extend it applies now. But if you have a year-long work permit, it's difficult to say in a year from now what that policy will be. So yeah, hopefully we'll have a bit more clarity on that April 6th, or you may just need to pay attention to the a year from now, pay attention to notifications from IRCC or news. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I would say that I'm sorry, like for those of us who are just now going to apply for our postgrad wouldn't need to be worried about extension just yet. Until we're in that phase of expiring and then there's no other option. I think at that time then the government would make an announcement pertaining to us. So I wouldn't for those of us who are now just going to, that's just my take, not to worry about extension just yet.
For sure, for sure. And I think there's another presentation coming up soon on immigration and PR. So that would be a great one to attend to get a little bit more clarity there. I think I would advise for now is to recognize that it's a great thing for many people that they're able to extend, but view your own application with the normal rules that it is a one-time offer and it can't be extended, so that you can sort of prepare for what you need to.
Exactly. Yeah, and thanks, Kamola. I agree with you. Let's just wait and see. Get your PGWP first, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
I do see that there are a couple people who have their hands up, but to be fair, I want to go through the questions that are in the chat first. So here's a fun one for both of you. Is it true that it is faster to go to the US border to apply for the PGWP? Is this advised?
Ooh, tricky. Is it true and is it advised? Certainly it is an option. So it's called flag polling. I'm sure everybody knows about it. You go directly to the US border, not the airport, the actual physical border between Canada and the US, and you apply for your work permit there. So it is something that is done and people do it. There are a few factors that we always ask people to consider. I mean, the first is that it is a 5-hour drive both ways if you're coming from Halifax to get to the closest border. So you do want to be sure that you're not going to waste your trip. Generally, things, I think, with most students tend to work out well. We always advise that you check in with us so that we can, determine whatever we can about your chances for success. Remembering that it is a border, it's not immigration, it's border officials, it's not IRCC. If they're very busy on that day, they can easily say to you, no, come back, we're not going to do it today. But it is an option if you have the means to do so. Then it is an option to consider, I guess.
And I agree. And what I would add to that is only do it if you really have to.
Yeah.
If you're in a kind of situation, and I can't think of one right now, of course, but if you're in a situation where you need that postgraduate work permit in your hand right away, contact us and we'll talk through the situation with you and figure it out.
Yeah.
It's a course of action that we recommend to very few students.
Yeah.
Just because we don't know what the outcome's going to be. That said, they seem to be more receptive at the borders to supporting students with their immigration concerns.
Mm-hmm.
But we always recommend to call ahead, explain your situation, but also call us first.
Yeah. Talk to us first. I mean, you don't want to end up, waiting in a line of 5 hours as well. If it's a busy border, a time of year that it's busy at the borders. One thing to note is that if long processing times for a postgraduate work permit can actually be a benefit for you, especially if you have a 1-year work permit. So if you're thinking about immigration and you're thinking about the experience class, which will be talked about a little bit more in the other presentation, but the normal stream for a lot of international graduates is the Canadian experience class, which requires 1 full year of work. So if you have a 1-year work permit, you have that exact length of time to get your work experience in. Being able to work while waiting for your permit to be approved can actually give you extra time. And that extra time you can count as work experience towards PR. So right now, the processing time for a work permit is about 4 months. So if you have a job and you're authorized to work, then you can begin working. You're getting an extra 4 months on top of that 1-year work permit. So sometimes applying online is actually a better thing to do. Some people get a little nervous. They think, well, I want the work permit in hand to be able to work, but it's perfectly authorized by IRCC that you can work while waiting for it to be processed. So again, all situations are different. Talk to us before making any, talk to your advisors before making any decisions.
Do you want to add anything to that, Mike?
Well, I was going to ask, could it be if I am with a spouse that has the open work permit that expires end of August, and I need the postgraduate work permit in my hands to extend their study permit, could that possibly be a conversation for flag polling so that I can get the postgraduate work permit in my hands, start working, get my 3 paychecks, and then usually 6 weeks after starting a job, still sometime in June or July, apply for my spouse open work permit extension. So I can do that before August 30th if the spouse open work permit expires August 30th. And I might not get my physical postgraduate work permit in my hands if I apply online until after that.
We'll take that as a good example of that would be a time to come and chat with us so we can determine. I mean, yes, there can always be valid reasons for doing it. What we just want to ensure is that you're not making a wasted trip.
And Mike will always come up with a scenario to match any situation. We know that from experience.
And that's actually a very brilliant scenario.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was a good one. It was a good one. Can't say no to that one.
Okay, so Kremina had a great question that I answered, but now we're going to see if I'm right or wrong. Kremina is asking if she needs to apply for a postgraduate work permit if her husband is applying for permanent residency, and can we work while waiting for the approval letter after our current permit expires? So my advice to Kremina is still to apply for the postgraduate work permit so that she is covered, and her spouse could also be covered while he goes through his process. But
Yeah.
then it's kind of where my expertise ends.
Yeah, and again, this would be a good question for the immigration presentation that's coming up. But yes, you want to be sure that you're always maintaining valid status in Canada. So PR can be a lengthy process. There can be a lot happening. So I would absolutely advise that you go ahead and apply for that postgraduate work permit so that you're maintaining valid status. You have the opportunity to work. I'm just trying to find the question here. And we work while waiting for the approval after current permit expires. So yes, so if you meet the criteria for working while waiting for the postgraduate work permit, then yes, you can continue working even if your study permit expires.
Can
As
I
long
add
as you
something on
submitted
this
an
question?
application.
My name is Carmen. I'm actually the one that asked asked the question. So I also have dependent children, which one of them is actually 19 years old, and we need to apply for him for study permit,
Mhm.
international student for post-secondary education.
Mhm.
So should I do it after I apply for my post-graduation work permit or before, or it doesn't matter?
It doesn't
If he
matter.
has his
It doesn't matter because that permit is relevant to his situation, right? So
Okay.
so as an international student, as you know, you require a study permit, so you don't have to wait for anything. You can go ahead and submit that application.
So we just need to apply for everything and just wait.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Okay.
important thing is always to just ensure that you're maintaining valid status.
Yeah.
One
Yeah,
of
I
the important
understand
things.
Yeah, because I was sure that I can apply for everyone when applying for PGWP, but now from what you said, I actually need to wait until I get my permit in order to apply for everyone else.
No, not necessarily. If your son has been accepted to a school and has that letter of acceptance, then that study permit application can be submitted at any point.
Okay, so it just applies for my husband until his work permit. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And Kremina, your son is just like you, so it's kind of independent of you. So he's got, as Caroline just said, he's got the letter of acceptance, so he can apply.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just because do we need to show the same amount of money as we did from abroad, or because he finished here high school and he is living in Canada actually, or it's just the same?
So for the study permit, you do have to
Yeah.
show financial support for that first year of study. But your situation might be different from when you were applying. You know, if you have a job, then that's also showing.
Yes.
Yeah,
We do.
yeah. But that requirement is still there for a study permit. But if the support is coming from parents, then that's fine. He can demonstrate that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So just a reminder for everybody, I do see that hands are up, but to be fair, I'm doing the questions in the chat so that we can clear those off. So please be patient. There are lots of questions. Please listen to the questions because your question might be answered. So back to what we said, you said. I'm making it sound like it's not a team effort here. For the working aged dependents, do you know if it I don't think it matters if it's a part-time job or a full-time job, as long as they have the open work permit?
No, an open work permit's valid for any type of work.
Yep. Okay, great. Easy one. Okay, we answered that. Charles asked a really good question about employers that might be hesitant to give permanent job offers to students, seeing that they're still on a study permit while they wait for the postgraduate work permit. But I put something in the chat, and it's actually on that PDF that I put in the chat already that summarized what Mike said. But basically, you can show your employer proof that you are allowed to work. And if the employer needs more, I'm happy to write a letter for you to explain, I'll outline the guidelines and show that you're allowed to work. But according to the Immigration Act, once you submit your postgraduate work permit, you're automatically allowed to work full-time. So if you need something that summarizes that, look in the chat. And I put a link to a help center comment that answers that question.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Actually, is it okay if sorry, let me clarify it again, because I think.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I agree with that, with what you have said just a while ago. But at the moment, for example, I will name the employer. There is there is one employer which is a large hedge fund services. What they're saying is they haven't hired anyone on a study permit. So this is prior to the PGWP being applied. So at the moment, they're willing to give like extend a job offer. But the problem is, in the past, they haven't hired someone on a study permit. Therefore, they're kind of hesitant. What are they going to do? They're asking me for like, I don't know, they're asking me for a timeline in which I can receive the complete, the transcript, as well as the completion from the school, and all of these other documents. So my question is, will the study permit not hold ground? Because in the study permit, it's clear, right, that it says there is a validity of the study permit, and therefore at the moment, IRCC allows student to technically do full-time work.
Yeah.
So that
Charles,
should
what
be
I would
sufficient,
say,
right?
if you want to connect your employer with me, and I can explain and address all of their questions. And sometimes with employers, it's just that they don't know. They haven't hired an international student in this situation before, or a recent grad. So I am very happy to clear up any confusion that they might have. So please just connect them with me, and I'll be happy to reply.
Thank you very much. Actually, that's the reason as well why Sam is here, because I talked to
great.
Sam about this. And thank you very much for clarifying. I'll also go back to the class as well, explaining the situation. Thank you very much.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. And
Maybe just to add on that, Ashley, can I add on something there, please?
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for organizing this session, and it really supports us even as a faculty, because we get a lot of questions from student immigration questions, and we don't have any answers. So this one is really helpful to us. And just like what Charles Andrew has said, actually it's not one employer who is hesitant, to give our student jobs because they are not sure of, the work permit status. So I think, Ashley, I'm going to circle back with you, and I can tell you the specific employers that you can have a session with them so that you can explain to them the situation, and I'm sure they are going to feel more comfortable to give our student jobs now.
I would be delighted. And I know sometimes that this is a stumbling block, and it's hard to know which employers. So if you know who they are and they want to talk to me, I am more than happy to do that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Super. Thank you. Solving problems. Here we go. Okay. Okay. Chihuahua asks a question. For a spouse that is still outside Canada and plans to come after graduation, Once I apply for a postgraduate work permit, can I submit the open work permit visa for the spouse outside Canada? Or do they need to have their postgraduate work permit approved before the submission of visa for the spouse? I think the answer is yes.
Once I apply, can I submit the open work permit for a spouse outside Canada? Same, I guess the same answer as the previous question. You need to meet the criteria for your spouse to be eligible. So you need to have a job. You need to be able to demonstrate that you have that job for 6 months past the application date. What I would probably recommend is, sorry, I'm just sort of just processing this through. It might be best for your spouse to come to Canada and then submit the application after they arrive. So they would come to Canada as a visitor, and then you can submit the application for the open work permit after they arrive. I'm just trying to think about things like processing times, or if there's any difference with the being outside or inside. That would be my recommendation. We could certainly, if you wanted to send an email, we could certainly do a little bit more digging, but my recommendation would be, I think at this point, for your spouse to come to Canada as a visitor and then submit the application online.
Yeah, thank you so much for your answer. Just would like to clarify about my question. Because we have already get the visa already, but unfortunately that our family can come here. So the problem is that we plan that we would like to wait until I graduation. So I just would like to save the time that I can meet my family. So I just wondering if it's possible to submit the visa again after I graduation immediately, or I need to wait until my PGWP approved, then I have to apply for them.
You don't have to wait. If there was a refusal, you can reapply at any point. The thing to do is to address whatever the reasons were for the refusal. So you don't have to wait until you've submitted your postgraduate work permit application to reapply for visitor visas from outside Canada.
Yeah. The visa that my family get right now for spouse is already open work permit, but they didn't come here to get the work permit inside Canada. We just only get the visa right now, but because they didn't come in yet, so I need to apply the visa again for him because it will be expired in the next year. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I'm going to suggest that maybe Chiwewa, you email us.
Yeah.
And so that we can do some more digging.
Yeah.
And if you have a question that's really specific to your case, you might just want to email us so that we can save a bit of time. And we also need to do some research. Sometimes we don't have quick answers.
Well, that's the thing. And sometimes there isn't a quick answer because every situation can be different. So I would much prefer to be able to read the situation, think about it, do some investigation, and then respond, as Ashley's saying. So yeah, so if I look like I'm kind of waffling, it's just really that I'm thinking and I don't want to provide wrong advice at this point.
Thank you.
Yep.
And honestly, whenever we get one of your questions, that's not something that we just know off the top of our head. We are automatically researching, talking, what did we say before?
Exactly.
So I always feel like when we do these questions live, it's like, we're bing, bing, bing. It's like an exam.
Yeah.
Memory recall.
Yeah. We need to have like a yellow card, like a soccer game, and say, no,
no, that's not it.
Yeah. Not happening.
Leandro asked another question here in the chat, and I think I can respond to it. But what happens if a postgraduate work permit is not approved shortly and the spouse's open work permit expires? So if your postgraduate work permit is not approved, then you will have to make plans to leave the country. And when the spouse's open work permit, when it expires, they have to stop working as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, at any point, you can apply for visitor status, and if you are to stay in the country. If your postgraduate work permit is refused and you're out of status, then you would also have to pay an extra fee to restore that status. And it would potentially depend on how long it's been that your other permit, like your study permit, has expired. But generally, yeah, if they're refused, you can reapply, but you also have to remember that you may need to leave the country. Yeah.
Okay. Can the spouse apply for a work permit if the postgraduate work permit is not approved yet? No. If the spouse has a work permit, they can continue working until that permit expires.
Yes. Yeah.
But they can't apply for a new one until you get your postgraduate work permit in the mail.
Or until you meet that criteria.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So remember, the spousal open work permit is all about you as the postgraduate work permit meeting the criteria for them to be able to apply. So you need to have the job. Yeah. The job needs to be valid for 6 months past the application date of their permit application. Yeah. So you need to meet. It's up to you as the postgraduate work permit to meet that criteria.
Yeah. Okay. Sobin asked about the documents required for the postgraduate work permit. So you will find that all in our guide. I'll put the link at the end, or maybe Mike, if you don't mind putting the link in the chat to our postgraduate work permit guide, also in the PDF that I put in the chat. And we'll also make this presentation and the documents available on Connect if you want to have a look at them. So we'll send a note out to everybody to let you know where those are. Okay. So Sobin asked another question. Oh, Mike, you've already answered. Never mind. Must you stop working if you have completed your course and you are yet to apply for a postgraduate work permit, even if you have a valid study and work permit? So if you got your letter of completion, yes. Because once you get your letter of completion, it means that you are no longer a student, so your study permit and co-op work permit is no longer valid. And then the next question in the same group is, what is the estimated timeline to get a PGWP after applying? So Caroline answered, it's about a 4-month wait right now.
And you can check application processing times online.
Yep. Yep, just Google check application processing times IRCC, and the link comes right up, and Mike has it right there. Can you apply for postgraduate work permit and PR at the same time? No.
No.
And the 5th question is a great one. When is the presentation for PR? It is next Thursday. Thursday at 4. And I am going to put that in the meeting chat as well. I'm trying to put a link to the meeting in the chat so you can just automatically put it into your calendars, but I didn't succeed to figure that out yet. Okay, so the 3 years starts when we receive the postgraduate work permit, not when we apply. Correct. So you're getting some bonus time. Can I apply for a postgraduate work permit if I'm doing a part-time job? Yes. I'm concerned, new question. I'm concerned about having a job and staying at that job for 6 months. What if I decide to find another job and start working for another company?
Stay in that job. If you're applying for a spouse open work permit, stay in the job for 6 months until the permit is approved, and then you can move on. But that's the criteria to meet.
Yep. Okay. I'm seeing that Mike answered a lot of these. Chisholm asked a question. I have kids with a study permit due at the end of August. When is the right time for me to apply for that extension?
Generally 3 months before the expiry date.
Yeah. And always remember that their permits are separate from yours. So you just have to keep their status maintained.
Just a
Okay.
real quick one on that. So like
Yeah.
if they're in like elementary school or middle school or high school, they don't have like a letter of acceptance, but you might not have your own postgraduate work permit by that time to show that you have extended status. So what would they use to renew and extend the study permit for a fifth grader? If they haven't gotten the postgraduate.
If they're already studying, if they're out of school, then I would contact the school itself or the educational center responsible, so the school board responsible for that school, and they should be able to provide a letter of enrollment.
Mm-hmm. Good question. Okay, thanks for being patient, everybody. Marianne's question, my current study permit expires April 19th, and I've already submitted my application for an extension. Excellent. Graduation is in June. I also have a full-time job offer, and since my current study permit allows me to work full-time, since the ban was lifted, the temporary allowance that you can work full-time hours, and my program also has a 5-week internship. My question now is, do I still qualify to keep working full-time after graduation while waiting for my letter of completion from school? So do you mean the time in between you finish your classes and you get your letter of completion?
Yeah, and I think it's around the submission, the renewal, the study permit renewal situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so because there's a clause that the extension has to be submitted on or before, I think October 7th or so, or is it approved or submitted? Because of that clause, I'm worried if I can continue working after I have graduated and waiting for the letter of completion from school.
That October 7th, that was for your initial study permit application.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
so you've passed that, and the renewal, if you've renewed before your study permit expires, then you maintain the same status until you get a response on that new application. So you're good.
Okay, thank you.
And also, I'm just going to throw in there to remind everybody, you will get your letter of completion and access to your official final transcripts most likely early June. So, so you're not waiting to graduate. You're not waiting to walk across the stage and get that fancy piece of paper. The only thing you're waiting for is your letter of completion, and your letter of completion and then access to your your unofficial final transcripts. That usually happens early June because you're going to be done your work placement end of May. It might take 2, 3, 4 days for the registrar to close you off. So keep that in mind. Your letter of completion and access to those final transcripts happens a week or 2, maybe even 3, before the fancy ceremony of convocation.
Okay. The fancy convocation ceremony. It is pretty fancy. Okay. So, Amika, I see your question here. So I just started my 2-year program in January 2023. When do you advise me to apply for my postgraduate work permit? I have a job since February. So your postgraduate work permit, you don't apply for that until you finish your NSCC program or if you're about to. So you don't have to worry about this for a little while. You can just make sure that you've got your valid study permit and co-op work permit. And if you have any questions, I would suggest that you contact Mike or Jenny or Farhana, whoever your international supports person is. Yes, we can get this recording. Here's a question from Teo. What if my spouse's open work permit expires before I get the postgraduate work permit? Current processing time is about 5 months, so it seems like I can't get the postgraduate work permit before my partner's permit's expiration date.
Okay, so again, this is about you meeting the criteria for your spouse to be able to apply for a work permit as the spouse of a postgraduate work permit holder. So if you have a job and all of the criteria that's around that job, the 6 months, et cetera, then you can submit that application for your spouse. If you don't meet the criteria, then your spouse will have to stop working. Your spouse can apply for visitor status to stay in Canada. And then once you do meet that criteria, you can submit the application online.
And Mike also replied and said, this could be a situation where you might consider flagpoling, but please consult us. Please consult us. Okay, we're at the end of the questions in the chat. I see anybody who had their hand raised, they gave up. Are there any other questions that folks have? Now's your chance. Our session, the session for next week is Thursday, March 30th from 4 until 5:30 p.m. You will get an email reminder about that session. You'll probably see it also in the ISA newsletter that Teo is putting together. So you will see a link to that session. So that's going to be led by Paula Berry Mercer, who's another RCIC friend, along with one of our colleagues from Nova Scotia Department of Immigration and Population Growth. So they can answer all of your PR questions. Please have a look at all of the documents that we have put into the chat. And what I will do too is I will send this presentation. Actually, what I'll do is I'm going to post this presentation and the recording and the associated documents on Connect, and I will send you a link and you can access them. Any parting thoughts, Caroline or Mike?
Just that we know that it can be complicated, that you've got a lot of maybe personal things going on. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. That's what we're here for. Yes. And thanks everyone for your participation and your questions and for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caroline. It's really great to have you here to do these presentations. Mike, thank you so much for giving us the campus perspective. And thank you everybody for participating today. So we will follow up. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, okay? But read the documents first. Read the guide, read all the information, do that first, and then ask us questions. Okay, have a great night, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.